Picture a ring of small electronic components, each one about the size of a coin, arranged in a circle on a lab bench in New York City. Nothing about it moves. There's no motor, no spinning disc, no whirring turbine, nothing that would look out of place next to a router or a guitar pedal. And yet, when researchers sent radio waves into this ring, some of those waves came back out stronger than they went in, as if the ring itself had reached into them and handed over a little bit of extra energy for free, which, on the face of it, sounds like it shouldn't be possible because you can't get more energy out of a system than you put in without breaking some pretty fundamental rules of physics. Except this ring wasn't just sitting there being a ring, it was pretending to be a black hole. And more specifically, it was pretending to be a black hole that's spinning so fast that, according to a set of ideas that are now more than 50 years old, it should be able to give some of its rotational energy away to anything that bounces off it in just the right way. So before we get into what these researchers at the CUNY Graduate Centre's Advanced Science Research Centre actually built, I think it's worth doing a quick refresher on why anyone would think a black hole could hand out energy in the first place. Because on the surface, black holes have kind of a one-way reputation. Stuff falls in, nothing comes out, end of story. And for a very long time, that was basically the whole picture. But back in 1969, the physicist Roger Penrose pointed out that the region right around a spinning black hole isn't quite as simple as the event horizon itself. Just outside that horizon, there's a zone called the ergosphere. And inside the ergosphere, space-time itself is being dragged around by the black hole's rotation, kind of like water swirling around a drain, except the water in this case is the fabric of space. And Penrose worked out that if a particle wandered into the ergosphere and then split into two pieces, one piece could fall into the black hole while the other piece escaped back out. And because of how the energy bookkeeping works in that dragged, rotating space-time, the piece that escaped could carry away more energy than the original particle had to begin with. The black hole, in other words, would lose a tiny sliver of its spin every time this happened, and that spin energy would essentially get handed over to whatever escaped. A couple of years later, the physicist Zel'dovich took the idea a step further and asked what would happen with waves instead of particles, and he predicted something similar. If a wave with the right kind of rotational twist hit an object that was itself spinning fast enough, the wave could bounce off amplified, stealing a bit of the object's rotational energy on its way out. This became known as superradiance scattering, and it's basically the wave version of the Penrose process. And here's the part that made it interesting to actual laboratory physicists rather than just black hole theorists. Zel'dovich's version doesn't require an actual event, horizon, or actual space-time curvature. It just requires something spinning fast enough relative to the wave hitting it. Which means, at least in principle, you could test it with something a lot more mundane than a black hole. And people have tried. Over the past several years, researchers have built acoustic versions of this experiment using spinning discs in fluid, essentially trying to get sound waves to bounce off a rotating vortex and come back louder. Those experiments have had some genuinely promising results. But there's a catch, and it's a pretty stubborn one. To get strong, unambiguous superradiant amplification, you generally need the object to be rotating extremely fast, faster than any physical disk or fluid vortex can really be pushed without flying apart or running into all sorts of mechanical limits. So for decades, this has been a case where the theory was elegant, the small-scale demonstrations were suggestive, but nobody could really push the rotation speed high enough in a real physical object to see the effect in its full dramatic glory. Which brings us to the new work, published in Nature by a team led by Andrea Alou, along with lead author Hadise Nassari and co-lead author Hadi Musa, working at the CUNY Graduate Centre's Advanced Science Research Centre. And their solution to the rotation speed problem is honestly the cleverest part of the whole study. Instead of trying to spin something physically faster, they built a ring of electronic resonators and then rapidly changed the electrical properties of those resonators in a carefully timed sequence, one after another around the ring. None of the hardware moved even a millimetre. But because the pattern of changes travelled around the ring in a coordinated wave, any electromagnetic wave interacting with the ring experienced it as though it were encountering an object spinning at some effective rotational speed. And that synthetic rotation could be pushed to speeds that a physically spinning object could never reach, arguably even faster than a real disk could handle without flying apart. And when they sent in electromagnetic waves with the right rotational characteristics matched to this synthetic spin, those waves came back amplified, broadband, and selectively, meaning it wasn't just a lucky resonance at one frequency, but a genuine energy extraction effect that showed up across a range of conditions. As Nassari put it, the experiment essentially moves ideas about extreme rotational dynamics from theory to practice, giving researchers an actual working platform instead of just equations on a blackboard. Now, I guess the obvious question is, does this mean scientists have literally extracted energy from a black hole? And the honest answer is not exactly. And also, kind of, depending on how strict you want to be about it. First possibility, this is a full, direct confirmation of the Penrose process as Penrose originally imagined it, meaning something falling into the ergosphere, splitting apart, and one piece escaping with more energy than it started with. Second possibility, and this is the one that actually matches what happened here. This confirms Zel'dovich's wave-based cousin of the idea, superradiant amplification, which shares the same underlying mathematics but works on waves scattering off a rotating system rather than particles splitting apart inside an ergosphere. And third, maybe there's already a version of this argument where none of it really counts as black hole physics at all, since there's no actual gravity, no actual curved space-time, and no actual event horizon anywhere near that resonator ring, just electronics on a bench. And that third possibility is actually the honest core of the story. So let's sit with it for a second. This experiment does not extract energy from an actual black hole, and it can't, because there isn't one anywhere near that lab. What it does is recreate the mathematics that governs how a spinning object exchanges energy with something bouncing off it, using a system where the researchers control every variable and don't have to wait for a real astrophysical object to cooperate. This is what's called an analog gravity experiment, and it's a strategy physicists have leaned on for a long time now, precisely because real black holes are somewhere between extremely far away and completely inaccessible. You can't walk up to the supermassive black hole at the center of the Milky Way and bounce a calibrated radio pulse off its ergosphere to see if it comes back stronger. But you can apparently build a stand-in out of resonators and radio waves that obeys the same equations, at least for the specific slice of physics being tested. So here's where things get a little bit more interesting and also a little more uncertain. Because this experiment uses synthetic, time-engineered rotation rather than anything physically spinning, it can reach effective rotational regimes that are, in a real sense, more extreme than what any mechanical system could ever produce. More extreme even than what you'd get spinning a physical disk, right up to the point where it would tear itself apart from centrifugal stress. That's genuinely useful because it means this platform could end up probing corners of superradiant physics that acoustic vortex experiments and other mechanical analogs simply cannot reach, no matter how good the engineering gets. But it also means we should probably be a little careful about overclaiming what's been validated here. What's been confirmed is that the Zel'dovich amplification mechanism works in this synthetic wave-based system and that it can be pushed into regimes nobody has directly tested experimentally before. What hasn't been confirmed, and honestly may never be directly confirmed given how far away actual spinning black holes are, is the particle-based Penrose process in its original form, the one involving something literally falling apart inside a real ergosphere. The researchers themselves seem to be pretty careful about this distinction, framing the result as reproducing the essential physics of the Penrose-Zel'dovich process rather than claiming they'd built a working miniature black hole. And they're also fairly upfront that this is, for now, a fundamental physics platform rather than a technology. Lou and his team have pointed out that the same synthetic rotation trick, engineering how a system's properties change across both space and time to fake an effective motion, could have uses well outside of astrophysics, in wireless communications, in photonics, and in quantum information processing, where controlling how waves pick up energy or get selectively amplified is useful for reasons that have nothing to do with black holes at all. Which I think is actually the more interesting way to zoom out on this. For most of the history of black hole physics, the entire field has been stuck testing its ideas against things that are, at best, hundreds of light years away, and usually millions or billions of light years away, using instruments that can only ever catch faint, indirect signals of what's really happening near an event horizon. Analog systems like this one are a way of sidestepping that problem entirely by building something small enough to sit on a lab bench that still obeys the same underlying equations as the real thing, at least for the specific piece of physics you're trying to isolate. And every time one of these analog experiments works, it doesn't just confirm decades-old theoretical predictions, it also opens up a slightly uncomfortable question about how much of what we think we understand about extreme gravitational objects is actually testable, versus how much of it is mathematics we trust because it's self-consistent and it matches the small pieces we can get our hands on. So the ring of resonators in that CUNY lab isn't a black hole, and nobody involved in the study is claiming it is. But it does mean that an idea Roger Penrose sketched out more than half a century ago, and Zel'dovich extended not long after, now has a working, tunable, repeatable laboratory version, one that can be pushed into rotational regimes no physical object could survive. And if that platform keeps delivering, the next open question isn't really about black holes anymore. It's about how far this synthetic rotation trick can be pushed before it starts telling us something new, something none of the original theorists were even trying to predict.